Hi, welcome to Slideshow. My name's Dave Hayward. I'm the founder of Europa Creative Partners. Today on Slideshow, I'm joined by Tim Sharp. He's the founder of Gen8, a generative AI strategy firm that focuses on marketing, upskilling, and governance. We're going to dig into a big question. Is AI in marketing exciting or existential? Let's get into it.
I was really excited, first and foremost by the name of the show, Slideshow, because in this line of work, some days you wake up and you feel that PowerPoint is life or Google Slides is life. And so I thought, well, we'll get a little bit meta and we'll pick a presentation that has had a fair bit of thought behind it. And we'll talk about the slides themselves as we go through the content. So that's what I had in mind for you today. And the topic itself is just a small question: AI in marketing, exciting or existential? This is the dilemma that our clients, that businesses all over the world are grappling with daily. And this particular presentation is a version of one that I gave in Auckland recently at the Institute of Directors, New Zealand. Now, I don't suppose that we'll be able to solve this giant question, but I wanted to take you through this as a bit of a way to show how we're helping clients navigate this brave new world.
Well, I think it's also important to note that you've got a global agency. You work a lot in APAC, I think, and in Australia, obviously. But you are one of us. You're a Kiwi, right?
Yeah, exactly. And another good reason to throw this presentation up, because it's got plenty of references that a lot of times, I wouldn't say they go over the audience's head, but for example, when I pulled up a photo of the Black Caps, for example, I know that you are going to be much more appreciative, perhaps.
I know it wouldn't be a meta conversation unless we were going full existential, and that is what we're going to do today. So, let's jump into the action.
I've spent a long time, a couple of years, trying to come up with a suitable, if not great, metaphor for how it feels to be a marketer at this moment in time. And I find myself cycling through a lot of these. For example, is it a black hole? Are we on the event horizon of a force that we don't understand as marketers, being sucked into oblivion, or again into something else that we don't understand? So is AI a black hole for marketers? Too dramatic. It's too much. So I did not go with this metaphor. And then I thought to myself, well, we hear it all the time, but, are we dinosaurs? Is the traditional way of doing things going extinct as marketers? Is there a great big AI-shaped asteroid hurtling through the sky, for our teams, for our departments, for our functions, for our campaigns? And then once again, good news straight off the bat. Again, this is just way too dramatic, because one of the big topics for today is that the fundamentals don't change. The reason that we go to market remains the same. It's to create and to communicate value for our customers, or however you might like to define it. So good news, this is not it. But where I landed was here, and it's the sense that things are happening so rapidly, that there's a tectonic shift happening, that the ground beneath our feet is moving, or what I really think the feeling is like is that we're cast adrift, that we're perhaps, lost at sea in search of new frontiers, new territory. Perhaps we're embarking away from, previously stable ground as marketers, as marketing teams, as departments. And so this is how I think that many of us feel at this moment in time, where we're cast to sea. There's a tectonic shift. We need direction, or perhaps we need a better boat. And so beyond that, the reason that I like to bring up this image so early in the presentation is that we'll refer to it a couple of times. This is, of course, a Rembrandt, lost on the Sea of Galilee. It's well over 100 years old, so 300 or 400 years old. We'll come back to this, but it's also the feeling that we need direction, and maybe we need a newer, more shiny boat, or do we?
Yeah, because I think one of the things that that's really I kind of feel at the moment, I know a lot of marketers are feeling, is the sense that there's no playbook yet. And the in the early days of web, essentially brochures that became websites, and then they started evolving to the point where you Now when you go on a site, you go in the top right, there's a hamburger there, and there's this kind of uniformity to websites, even despite how diverse they all are. And my sense with AI at the moment is that that isn't there yet. We're still all exploring and figuring things out at the same time.
Totally, totally. I think that's right. But it's not to say that there is no destination.
No, that's true.
Of course, one of the most important things to do in a presentation like this is for it to be as grounded and real as possible. And so the next level or the next layer of framing is to make sure that I'm bringing in as much real world client perspective and as many real world examples as possible into the presentation. And so we've got our metaphors. It's a fun way to get started. We've kind of, soothed a few of those big kind of scary things. And now we're going to get real. And this is a quote from a client of ours that I think really hits the nail on the head. Has there ever been a more exciting or a scarier time to be a marketer than right now with generative AI? And this is something that the head of marketing at a very large regional tech company said about 1.5 years ago after one of our projects. And I think it's not getting any less pertinent as we go through this journey. So how do we help clients deal with this? We typically frame this moment in 3 ways. So this is all happening right now, but to use the classic kind of onion analogy, the more you dig into it, the more layers there are to it. But at a high level, we typically frame all of this in 3 ways. So number one, for marketers, AI is adding capability. You can do things that you couldn't do before. Secondly, this is reshaping the team. The medium-term version of that looks quite different from the longer-term version of that, and we'll shortly touch on things like agents. Are they real? Are they not? Will they be? And then the last part here, and most important of all, is that new ways of working, new types of risk. It's an entirely new governance paradigm, from intellectual property to data security through to damaging your brand simply because you're using too much AI. The first part is about adding capability. The classic framework that we use from an executional standpoint is to look at 5 different types of generative AI model or foundation model, from language to image to video, audio, and then maybe avatars, which bring multiple models together. But the key thing here is when we're starting to do a landscape overview is to talk about how we are very rapidly moving away from just a prompt as the primary means of input. So, at this point, we're all very familiar with, for example, things like text to image generation. And so when we're introducing the landscape, as we're doing now, we start to look at very important trends like proprietary image generation models and then how those are being applied by leading brands. One example might be Levi's made global headlines a year or so ago that they will begin testing AI-generated models, or that Levi's will use AI models alongside human ones. Virtual fashion shoots, Levi's will test AI-generated clothing to increase diversity. Now, you might notice that each of these headlines is getting a little bit more defensive, and there's a reason for that. And we're going to circle back to how the story ends for Levi's. But this is not going away, because if this was last year, this is last week. H&M are doing exactly the same. You can see that they're trying to own the narrative a little bit more this time. H&M to create digital clones of models using AI. This is a campaign that they're rolling out to promote this. She's like me without the jet lag. So one of these is a real model on the left-hand side, Matilda. She can now send herself anywhere in the world to do a shoot. So indistinguishable from the traditional photo shoots. You've got a person who's done this with consent. So very interesting kind of model for where things are headed, but there are still a lot of gray areas. And again, we'll come back to those. But the point is, when we do our landscape overviews, we really want to convey this trend, actually, that we are moving away from text-based prompts to much, much more sophisticated proprietary models and so on. And where I see this happening is that for many, if not most brands that are dealing with a physical product, we are reaching a point now where it doesn't matter how complex the product is, you are going to be able to train a custom diffusion or image generation model to replicate that product in any scenario or in any situation. The example that you see here is not a real Porsche campaign, but it comes from a Dutch creative director called Christian Kompan. He calls this series hyperrealism, and his sole purpose is to see how realistic you can get complex physical objects like a car. This is not a real image. It's not a real car. Traditionally, you would have set up probably for the day, if not the afternoon, after scouting the location for this photo shoot. Your photographer would have been up in the rafters of the warehouse, maybe waiting for that perfect moment where the sun would cross over the skylight and create this beautiful lighting with which to photograph your car. This has happened instantly using open source AI models. It never happened. It's not a real car. Just like we never took that same car and sent it to Tokyo. We didn't get permits to close off the streets and to do this shoot. Or just like we didn't take that same car and send it to the Swiss Alps, or maybe this is Central Otago after a particularly lush summer. I think what you can see is that maybe the things that we were speaking about 18 months ago, certainly 2 years ago, in terms of small details of a product or even logos or image or text, are very, very rapidly becoming a thing of the past. And we're at the point now where you can replicate very complex products anywhere in the world almost instantly. So this is how we start to do our landscape overviews, and then we start to take it to the other types of models that we mentioned before. Of course, then you can go from image generation to video generation. This is getting really, really good. But what you see here is a little bit compressed, but that's more on the slide, to be honest, because Runway and their latest models will give you 10 seconds of 4K resolution video generation. And speaking about moving beyond a text prompt, what we're doing here is we're using an image as the prompt, and then we're bringing it to life. Now, I've also been able to specify virtual directing of sorts. So I've been able to say, swing the camera around the front, or we could say zoom out, or we could say give me a drone perspective. And absolutely we can poke holes. You're not putting this in your flagship TV commercial. You could take a really close look at the wheels or the suspension and say, well, actually, the front coils are not engaging as accurately as they should. But by the same token, you could also compare this to something from 6 months ago, and you could say, well, all four wheels are generating very accurate smoke. The reflection, the shadows of the car are accurate compared to the position of the sun. And then, most importantly, this never happened. We never took this car, painted it red, and shipped it to the salt licks of Bolivia for the shoot. In the past, this is $1 million production. Here it is happening in a matter of seconds for a matter of dollars. So you can very quickly see here that just as we're moving beyond simple text-based prompts for a lot of these products, that the fidelity and the multimodality is getting incredibly realistic.
It's also allowing, earlier in the creative process, you can iterate faster. You can, you can come up with concept art and ideation a lot clearer than was ever possible before. So I kind of feel like the frequency at which you can go through that creative process and visualize how a concept's going to look is enhanced way beyond what was possible even 2 years ago.
Absolutely. A lot of this work happens behind the scenes or during the process itself, right? As you mentioned, for a lot of reasons, not all accuracy. We'll kind of get to the risks and governance in a minute. But I heard a really funny story the other day from an agency, and they were talking about how the new norm is to storyboard shoots using image generation, and then to go and then produce, to shoot a real ad using that storyboard. But what they'd done is they'd gone to the client with this beautiful pitch of these beautiful scenes, and they'd almost kind of, stitched themselves up, because then the client turns around and says,
yeah, I got it.
We're going to Italy. We're going to do this on the Amalfi Coast. We've got the exact mood and lighting, and now we need to replicate that. And well, actually, getting it from, page to, production was a whole other story. Wrapping up the market landscape or the overview, I talked about cycling through these different types of modality, different types of content. Of course, we're doing a lot of work bringing these models together through something like a virtual avatar. So you're stitching together a language model, image model, video, of course, because they're talking, voice, You might clone the voice, you might use a standard voice, and then it all comes together with something like a virtual avatar. Our first New Zealand case study of the day, Skinny Mobile, made global headlines recently for their campaign in which they selected Liz from the Bay of Islands to be their new ambassador. And this is a brilliant campaign. It's funny, it's tongue-in-cheek, and I think it makes a lot of sense for a challenger brand. So, this to me is a really fun use of the technology, but as we move through the prezzo, we need to constantly remind ourselves that just because we can, it doesn't mean that we should. And of course, this technology opens up a Pandora's box, if you will, of ethical, legal, privacy considerations. But before we get to those, which we will, one of the things to remember is that the quality of all of the stuff that we're talking about has gotten so good that even the people making the ads are falling victim to misuse. And the headline here says it all. CEO of the world's biggest ad firm targeted by deep fake scam. The same technology that marketers are using to create the ads are being misused by bad actors for a range of, terrible purposes. And so this, leads us into another very, very important topic, which is that as an industry, we're actually at the leading edge of not just deploying and adopting all of these tools and technologies, but having to make those decisions about how they're used. This is what we mean by adding capability. We can create images, we can create ambassadors, voices, all these rich types of content and strategies that we perhaps could not do before with the resources that we have today. But we need to keep reminding ourselves that so much of this is a new frontier and there's always more than meets the eye. So in this case, yes, we're adding capability, but what I worry about is what happens when everybody's a little bit good at something and then we need real deep expertise in a particular area. So I think the flip side of the coin here is that AI is adding marketing capability, but it's risking diluting it. What do I mean by that? You'll see that our painting is starting to make a comeback. One of the frameworks that I like to pull up here is something that we've seen a lot in the last 10 to 20 years. Ideas like the T-shaped marketer. Some people have an F, some people have a W, some people have an M. But the point is that the discipline has become so broad, particularly with digital, particularly with social, mobile, that our teams are or have been put together like the Avengers. You've got people who are really good at particular things. But that doesn't mean that you have to be good at everything because, again, the discipline is so broad, right? So that, as we know, is the concept of the T-shaped marketer. I might be really, really good at SEO, but I might not have much background in social. And actually, the example that we see here is pretty generic. It could be any type of T. What I think is happening is that all of the examples, the landscape that we've just been through is slowly spelling the end of this type of thinking because it's a little bit like a video game. Our team members, our characters are leveling up all the time because they have access to do more in all of these areas, plus, right? So the question that I would put to you as well is this the end of the T-shaped marketer? Because instead of being really focused on one thing, we can all be pretty good at a lot of things. This is where the cricket references come in. Because, the great thing about this, right, is that all of a sudden, it's not a choice of can you bat, can you bowl? It's you've got a team of really, really good all-rounders. And that is tremendously exciting, isn't it? All of the things that we've just talked about. But then again, we always have to ask ourselves, what's the flip side of the coin? What are we missing? And the analogy here is, well, if everybody's an all-rounder, then who's keeping wicket? And I think that the risk here is that we're creating these blind spots because we're all trying to do a lot of things a lot of the time. What do I mean by blind spots? Here's our painting. We're finally back to it. It's the Storm on the Sea of Galilee. It's a Rembrandt, 1633, so that's 400 years old. And this painting is a masterpiece because Rembrandt dedicated his entire career, if not life, to learning how to paint. Whether that's mixing pigments, whether it's painting with the sharp end of the paintbrush, whether it's mastering light and shadow, artworks like this didn't just come to be. And there are parallels in every industry, certainly in marketing and advertising. People like Ogilvy are endlessly quotable. I do not pine for the good old days of Mad Men, at
No.
all. But, very quotable gentleman. One of the things he said in the 80s was that good writing is not a natural gift. You have to learn to write well. And what I take away from, snippets like this is the art of practicing, the value of experience. Strategy, for example, is what you don't do. And you make those decisions because you oftentimes learn from, doing too much
Bad
along the way.
mistakes. Yeah, yeah. I've got a degree in fine arts, actually. Funnily enough, I studied painting at art school, and I can confirm actually that the most successful people that came out of that art school, in terms of, I mean, just in staying in there. Obviously, I became a marketer. That they were the ones that actually were not necessarily the most talented. They were the ones that really worked at the craft. It was the exact opposite of what you might think, because over time they had to become really good consistently. That was the difference, I think, between someone who's got mercurial talent and someone who doesn't. And so I think, I concur with both Rembrandt and Ogilvy on this one.
And what does it mean for jobs, right? I mean, we talk about repetition, we talk about processes. We're having to make thousands of decisions every day. We don't always get to do the fun stuff either. And what does it have to do with AI? And well, what sent me down this rabbit hole, if you like, is that there are endless examples of when that expertise becomes crucial to fulfilling your role, to getting that campaign out the door, to effectively reaching your customer, so on and so forth. And so over time, you might be an artist, you might be a writer, you might be a planner, you might be a musician, right? What about the next generation of singer-songwriters who, spent their childhood, their teenage years learning how to play guitar and to sing? Or are you a great director because you've put the time in with your film camera, or, going to parts of the country that aren't perhaps, always represented on the silver screen, so on and so forth, right? Masters of your craft. The marketing industry is, quite unique because creativity is so inherent to what we do. This could be strategy, it could be creativity, it could be writing, so on and so forth, right? So what I'm really getting at here is, well, what happens when we're all a little bit good at something? Do we forget about being really, really good at a few things? And then what happens when we need that skill set? I also think that we should be paying very close attention to the next generation of team members to enter not just the workforce, not just marketing, but more broadly. And we're also starting to see the first wave of studies come out that suggest that students who are relying too much on generative AI may actually be missing out on these basic skills. For example, Wharton had this study that came out late last year. Very alarming, very worrying. What do you miss when you don't go through that period of building experience or, honing your craft?
Yeah, for marketers, it would be, I think, the spreadsheet, because I think every marketer thinks it's going to be Mad Men or whatever when you come into it, and then you just presented with clean the spreadsheet, and I think that's the worry, is that the reason that generative AI is so powerful in the hands of someone who's been around a while is because we know what good looks like. But it's difficult if you haven't necessarily had to make your way through all those kind of granular decisions to know what good looks like, in that if you haven't got that experience.
We introduce the landscape. Everything is awesome. Everything is not awesome. We need to start to think about what this does to the team in the longer term. And I think that there are dual horizons here, because in the short term, you're going to get a whole bunch of people who are supercharged because, you can do all of these things because they're at your fingertips. And so the current team is able to feel like they can do a lot more. In the longer term, the team itself will become slowly and then I think quite drastically reshaped. But we need to really, really guard against hype and overpromising here. And that is my segue into the world of agents. And in particularly, I'm not thrilled about the way that these are often presented or positioned. And I don't necessarily think that we should be thinking about agents as replacing the org chart or sitting on the org chart themselves. And, you see headlines like this and they are quite alarming. Today's CEOs are the last to manage all human workforces. That's a very, very large, bold assertion, and we're hearing it louder and louder and louder. And I think it really bears investigating. Because when you really look into the first wave of virtual agents, one thing or aspect to this that I think is underappreciated is that the first wave of virtual agents disproportionately target a few parts of your business. One is software engineering, but the other is sales and marketing. What about some examples? Well, it could be market research. You can go onto ChatGPT at the moment. You can dial up a virtual CMO or a product marketing specialist to chat with. And there are startups popping up all the time around the clock. And almost to a T, most virtual agent startups at the moment have some sort of product that will email your customers, try and request a meeting, book that meeting, and so the cycle continues. I think we should take these claims with a grain of salt because they are not able to do what the real team does. You can see I'm choosing my words very carefully here. I think the simple takeaway is that if it sounds too good to be true with this stuff, keeping in mind that marketing is on the forefront of adoption and having to make those decisions, let's do our research. Let's see, are the results there? What can they actually do at the moment? And there's a fantastic quote here that I've been referring to for a couple of years now, actually, from Reddit. This org chart is by someone who has never run a company. So I think it's just a fun way of saying that, there needs to be a bit of a reality check when we start to think about can the actual work be done by AI? And then the example that I always like to say here is that, virtual agents are real. They are out there. And if you want to see them in action, the easiest way to do that is actually just to check your junk mail, because you're almost certainly going to have, dozens of AI generated emails in there at the moment trying to book a call or reaching out because they've read something and then summarized it from your website. Very quick word on virtual agents, a lot of potential. Take with a grain of salt as one of the first parts of the business in particular who's adopting this tech. And the last part of the presentation is about risk and it's about governance. Now, for marketers, again, cutting edge, first to adopt, we need to wade through the good, the bad, and the ugly a lot sooner, if not first of all, compared to many other parts of the business. There's a lot that we could talk about here. We could spend the whole session talking about intellectual property. This is the front page of not just the Times recently, but also the Sun, the Mirror. Every single major UK newspaper aligned, possibly for the first time ever, make it fair. Blanketing their covers. Yeah, that's right. So it's to protest loss of AI protections. Is it fair that our articles, our journalists' livelihoods are used to train competing or derivative large language models? For marketers, pick your tools wisely because this applies across all of those modalities that we mentioned earlier. The classic example that we are all keeping a very close eye on in the image generation space, for example, is Getty Images versus Stable Diffusion. I love this image here because you can see that the AI generated image is not just showing strange appendages or dodgy text and logos, but it's actually reproduced a Getty Images watermark. Now, if you're a stock imagery company, this is existential for you, isn't it? You have not given your entire set of assets to a company to train for free, right? $1.8 trillion is the value of that lawsuit. As a marketer, we're picking these tools. We need to make sure that we're on the right side of this. I often point to tools like Adobe Firefly. Not perfect, but you have transparency and traceability in terms of what the model is trained on, in this case being the Adobe stock library. And in fact, companies like this are so confident in the legality of their AI products that they will foot the bill if you go to court for copyright infringement. Very simple takeaway here, whether it's a language model or an image model or a video or an audio model, is that you can have excellent quality generative AI on fully licensed data sets. And that itself is the topic of a whole other podcast that maybe we should do one day.
Yeah, this is so profound, this change, that, and again, have to stress that it's happened over such a short period of time. But, like even basic marketing tasks, like, writing a blog, and it always used to be a hassle to find an image that wasn't some guys in suits pointing at a screen or something like that. And all of a sudden, you're given this tool which basically you just write what you want in it and it will generate it. And so that's, for marketers, it started, it's like even basic tasks. That's why we've been so disproportionately affected, I think, in that respect. What are there, I know this is a deep topic, but are there any particular tools that you think are doing a really good job of digital sovereignty?
Firefly is one on the image generation front. In terms of large language models, very interesting, because the other big lawsuit here is New York Times versus OpenAI. And it is absolutely possible to train an effective large language model using fully licensed content. Mm-hmm. Two examples would be Clem with a 3, KL3M, which is a legal focused language model. Yep. It's trained entirely on public domain legal materials, so court filings, proceedings, contracts, so on and so forth. It's got complete provenance in terms of what it was trained on. And there's another example called Playas, which is based in France, I believe, and they also train their language models on the public domain. Do you think that the status quo at the moment in terms of IP is uncomfortable? And so, we absolutely should be asking for and welcoming more solutions like this where you know what it was trained on.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's also, we've talked a bit about art today because of the metaphors that you've been talking about. But, for creators, this is a really uncertain and disruptive time, because your IP for such a long time has been not easy to codify, but relatively easy to codify. And now we have these tools which completely disrupt that. I think probably the biggest example is I don't know how to say it, is it Studio Ghibli, the mm-hmm. Japanese mm-hmm. one, where suddenly people, it was all over LinkedIn for about 3 weeks, where people were taking images of themselves. And, LinkedIn and other social networks had this almost allergic reaction to them, because people were like, well, this is one of the, famously took something like 3 months to produce 11 minutes of content or something. And we're taking all that craftsmanship and cheapening it with this tool that took, less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's a massive, massive topic, and we need to confront it head on. Mm-hmm. I'm also really hoping that my next slide is the one I think it is, because I think it really builds on your point. Here it is. Yes. Okay. So when we talk about responsible AI, when we talk about intellectual property, we need to think about the interconnectedness of our other responsible AI principles, one of which is fairness. Now, in the case of being remunerated for your work, that is one thing, but I said that we would circle back to this example of Levi's and their AI models for their fashion shoots. And I mentioned that this launched with a lot of fanfare, number of press releases, made global headlines, but over time, the narrative, in fact, pretty quickly changed. And it went from, Levi's is doing something cutting edge to Levi's addresses backlash after using AI models to increase diversity, quote unquote, in online shopping. Virtual supermodels made with AI spark fears in the fashion workforce. And the last one, Levi Strauss clarifies its use of AI-generated models after online backlash. There's an amazing quote here underneath one of these posts as well that says, if Levi's wanted to increase diversity in its campaigns, it could have simply hired more models. And I think, to me, that sums it up, right? Because so much of this is so exciting that we just need to constantly be mindful or guided by the fact that just because you can, it doesn't mean that you should. And so brands are starting to find this out the hard way. And then where does this lead? Well, ultimately, it can lead to damage to your brand itself. Great example here. You would have seen this campaign last year, Coca-Cola's flagship Christmas campaign, completely AI generated. So I can imagine exactly how this was made. We're going to do this in record time without picking up a camera. And that means pushing the tech to its limit, which, we'd love to do in agencies, or we'd love to do in marketing departments or in our campaigns. AI generated polar bears, AI generated Santa, AI generated trucks. None of this ever happened. Just imagine that you put your heart and soul, or, you spend, 24 hours a day for 3 weeks or whatever creating this asset, this campaign, and then how's the reaction? It's like God. This. It's just absolutely panned. And, this time it's not just marketing industry headlines talking about lacking authenticity, backlash. It is real customers in the real comments section to your YouTube video. The irony of the real magic tagline at the end of a fake commercial. As a 3D artist, it fills my heart with joy to see this received poorly. Is Pepsi okay? So it's a really good reminder. Just because we can, it doesn't mean that we should, and so on and so forth.
But I like where you're going with this, Tim, because you have to have empathy for the team that produced it. Because, there's a concept in poker called being pot committed, and that's when you've got too much money on the table and you've got a bad hand, and you shouldn't, you should drop that hand, but you can't get over it because you've got too much money on the table. And I've been there on the agency side where you've worked so hard on a creative and you're steaming towards the client presentation or to production, and you sort of know it's not right, but you can't stop. It's too late by then, and you can imagine the Coca-Cola team, they would have been like kids in a sandbox playing, loving what's going on, but, all the while steaming to this disaster.
It's the runaway Santa.
Yeah, the runaway Santa. Exactly. Yeah.
And the irony is there's a fantastic case study for this, and there's another similar campaign by Under Armour, and it breaks down the process by the agencies involved. And the irony, in fact, the quote from the Under Armour case study is that there is no magic button. There is no silver button. There's no silver bullet. There's no, big shiny app that you can open that creates the commercial for you. And when they break it down, it was an extreme amount of effort. So in this case, Coca-Cola, I think, created something like 15,000 still images to then put into their video generation models. So they are putting all of the effort in a different way to try and master the new technology. And then this is how it's received for all of the reasons and more that we just discussed. So it is a minefield.
Yeah, totally. It's almost like faking the moon landing by flying to the moon and shooting it.
I really want to go down the rabbit hole here about conspiracy theories and the moon, but maybe we'll just keep it on track here.
Yeah, let's keep on track, yeah.
So, look, it's a lot to think about, right? But, as we close things out, we've got to bring it back to that original quote and that feeling. Has there ever been a more exciting or a scarier time to be a marketer than right now, with generative AI specifically? And if you think about the 3 topics for today, or the 3 ways in which we've framed the discussion, the dilemma, the balancing act, the needle, each of them, there's more than meets the eye. So when we talk about adding capability, yes, we can take our product and we can send it anywhere around the world without booking a flight ticket or without picking up a camera. But over time, are we risking diluting that capability because we're losing a lot of that hard-fought experience? And as a result, we may have a team of all-rounders, but we might forget about who's keeping wicket. So we have these blind spots. Or we might be all pretty good at a lot of things, but sometimes you need to be really good at a few things. So that's number 1. The second thing we spoke about is this idea of the different impact horizons. So in the short term, all of this capability at your fingertips supercharges an existing team or a really good team. But in the long term, it threatens the team, especially when people are out there talking about AI team members joining the org chart. I would say just, as much of this, take with a grain of salt, experiment, see what works, see what doesn't. Is there a gap between what you're being sold and then, what is actually happening? And then lastly, it's an entirely new governance paradigm. We had a few examples from fairness, intellectual property, then there's data security, there's bias, many, many examples, new ways of working, new types of risk. This wraps up the program. We've tackled a few questions. We've probably created a lot more. I do like to bring it back to our painting. one more time. And considering that this presentation was made for a New Zealand, specifically an Auckland audience, I have one more little trick up our sleeve, which is to say that if only there was a group of people out there who had the aptitude, the attitude, and the wherewithal to simply build a better boat.
Oh, man.
And we're done.
We love that. Thank you, Tim. That's it's been incredible. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for coming on Slideshow. It's been really mind blowing presentation, and I hope you'll come back and we can maybe tackle some of those deep rabbit holes that we want to go into, including faking the moon landing, obviously.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I hope that I think with presentations like this, you want to tell a story, but you want it to be relevant, you want it to be real. And I just think that when it comes to marketing and AI, you don't want to be the person that gets up there and says that everything is awesome, because it's not. It is a brave new world. It is a new frontier. And, truly, this is one of the parts of the business that has to work through very seriously the good, the bad, and the ugly.
One thing I found myself asking guests, which I think is really pertinent here, is if you're a school leaver or leaving university and you're getting into marketing, what do you think they should be prioritizing now?
I think the good news is that the fundamental act or process or discipline of marketing doesn't, I believe, change at all, really, with a lot of this stuff. For example, I'm taking Mark Ritson's course at the moment, Mini MBA for Marketers, and it's centered around the 4 Ps.
Oh, wow.
Product, price, place, and promotion. All of these things you still need to do, whether or not you can develop a strategy like this, or with a lot of research, or over many, many months. The other way to answer the question, which I think is done a lot, doesn't make it any less relevant, is that critical thinking and fact checking and learning to communicate your ideas, all of these things, some of which are soft skills, are super, super important. I think it's a confluence of all of these things, but the North Star is that the reasons that you go to market and then the fundamentals don't or shouldn't change. So, from that point of view, I would take a lot of confidence and then start to think about, well, how can you execute faster, better, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think you're right on the communication thing. I think one thing that I don't think has been diminished thanks to generative AI is I still think you need to be a great writer, in order to communicate your ideas to different stakeholders. And even if that writing skill is taking some generative copy and making sure that it's appropriate for the audience that you're trying to communicate it to. Tim, it's been amazing. Thank you for coming on Slideshow. And thank you for the very first ever meta slideshow, which I think is something that we need to come back to. And like I said, I hope you'll come back and see us again.
Thanks, Dave. It's been fun. I hope it's been useful, and I'm always up for a chat.
Fantastic episode. Big thank you to Tim for coming on. I'd like to thank Europa Creative Partners team for all their efforts in producing this show. If you could like and subscribe, we really appreciate all the support we can get, especially at this stage of the game. Come back next time where we're going to interview science journalist Jamie Morton. Thanks for watching, listening, whatever platform you're on, and catch you next time.